I just want to thank you all for attending this afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be with you as we explore together the Right Question Institute's Question Formulation Technique. My name is John Sessler, and I began working as an arts educator, as a theater and creative drama teacher throughout the Midwest, and now I work with organizations as an education consultant in the areas of arts, media, and technology integration and professional learning for educators. And I have the privilege of working with the Right Question Institute to lead PD for educators to learn how to integrate the question formulation technique, or the QFT. And Connie, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. And I'm Connie Williams. I've been an educator for over 30 years, with 28 of them as a teacher librarian with Petaluma City Schools in Petaluma, California. I started using the QFT after reading the book by Warren Berger called A More Beautiful Question, and got hooked up immediately with Right Question Institute and have used it in a variety of settings from elementary through college.
Thank you. Thank you, Connie. And
hi, I'm so sorry to jump in. Thank you for picking up the slack. Somehow I got booted out of the audio, and I'm the host. I don't know how that happens. But I just wanted to just jump in and say if anyone has any questions during the presentation, to use the Q&A box on the upper right of your screen, and we will do the best to answer as many questions as we can. And we will redirect you at the end to a landing page where you can request more information about the QFT and Points of View Reference Center and EBSCO database. So I'll talk more about that at the end. But
thank you so much, Tammy. And I'll begin by providing a brief history of the Right Question Institute's work, and then a broad overview of the question formulation technique, or QFT as we call it. And then I'll hand it over to Connie to share the way she has integrated the strategy with her students. And I am going to ask you to grab a scratch piece of paper and a pen or pencil, and in just a few minutes, we will actually experience the question formulation technique together as a group. So let's take a journey back to where it all began in 1990. Co-directors of the Right Question Institute, Dan Rothstein and Lou Santana, and their colleagues at the time were working on a dropout prevention program in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And they heard from parents in this community who said that they weren't participating in their children's education because they didn't even know the right questions to ask. So Dan, Luz, and their colleagues set out to solve that problem, and they gave the parents a list of questions and realized very quickly that they only created more dependency on them to keep on coming up with these questions for the parents. So RQI went to work to figure out how they can teach the skill of asking better questions, which is really a sophisticated skill that very often is learned only through years of professional training and practice. And it was a long process of trial and error, and eventually they came upon the process, the question formulation technique, or the QFT, that's been used in multiple fields, from the healthcare field to family engagement to voter engagement, and it's been featured in research and publications such as Warner Berger's book, as Connie mentioned, A More Beautiful Question. And of course, it's been used in the classroom. So we have a quick poll just to ask all of you if you have ever used the QFT in your work. So it was really after the publication of Make Just One Change, published by the Harvard Education Press in 2011. And since then, RQI has been an educator-led movement, and really using the QFT has been something that has grown in the grassroots adoption of educators. 250,000 educators across the globe are now using the question formulation technique. And the book, Make Just One Change, has been translated now into 4 different languages, and there's even more languages to come. And educators are using it not that it's required or mandated in any setting, but because it addresses a problem that they recognize: teaching learners how to ask better questions. So let's just see, are any of you familiar with the QFT, or have you used it with your own learners? Let's see if we have the results of that poll. And as that poll has ended, I'm just going to mention that The materials are available on the Right Question Institute website at rightquestion.org. And this is with the generous help of our funders. And so we encourage you after this webinar to check out the resources that are available for free. And I'll mention that again at the end of our session together. So we have about 16% of our attendees that have used it, and the majority of you have not. So I'm really excited that we can go through the strategy together. But in the theme of this session, let's explore the art of questioning and the art of asking better questions in this age of Google. In his book, Smarter Than You Think, journalist and tech blogger Clive Thompson, he explores human and computer symbiosis and how this relationship, if harnessed correctly, will expand human intellect and strengthen our creativity. And he really takes a positive look at human and computer interaction. But he does pose this question: how should you respond when you get powerful new tools for finding answers, just like Google? And we couldn't agree more with his answer: think of harder questions. And so even college presidents in higher ed and professors in higher ed agree with this critical skill to teach question asking. Nancy Cantor, the former chancellor of University of Illinois, says the best we can do for students is have them ask the right questions. Yet, in a study conducted by Allison Head at the University of Washington last year, found that only 27% of students believe college actually taught them how to ask their own questions. But we all know, and I'm sure we can all agree, that the problem begins long before college. Let's take a look at this chart. You can see, as the lines show and indicate, with basic skill attainment in reading and writing, the lines generally go upward as students reach their high school years and beyond. But then if we overlay the skill of asking questions, you see that yellow line drops drastically starting at age 4. And I imagine any of you that have young learners or work with young learners know this firsthand. They are full of questions. But what happens after age 4? We think part of the reason for that is because there's a lot of pressure focused on answers, getting the right answers for tests and exams within our education system. And certainly that is a very important and good goal, but there's also an important and critical role for the skill of question formulation and developing that skill in order to get better answers, in order to harness that technology, as we mentioned, and critically analyze and make discerning choices between the information we're bombarded with through the media. So the skill of question asking is being recognized more and more with this strong movement towards inquiry-based learning and within standards, as we'll talk about more later. So we're looking at how to accelerate that movement from teachers asking questions to students asking questions. When students ask questions, their questions become this catalyst for greater curiosity, for engagement, for ownership, and for deeper learning. So the goal of the question formulation technique, or the QFT, is to help accelerate that shift from teachers asking questions of students to students asking their own questions. It really distills some of the best pedagogical practices into a very simple teaching and learning process. When the question formulation technique is used in the classroom, students learn to work with their questions, and that specifically means they're producing their own questions. Then they work with their questions to improve them. They strategize on how to use their questions, and as a part of the process, by the end, they're reflecting on what they have learned and how they learned it. So now, it is our opportunity to experience the QFT together. So this is when I ask for you to bring out your pencil or pen, and then also a piece of paper. And so I am going to lead you through the QFT process with the help of Connie. And this is going to be possibly a little frustrating at first, because this will be a very abbreviated session of the question formulation technique. And of course, if you were leading this with your learners, it would be longer, at least 20 minutes going through the process to really go through each step. But because we're doing this virtually, we're going to make the most of it and try to lead you through it in an interactive way. So to begin, let's look at the rules for producing questions. Dan and Luz figured out how to create a list of 4 rules from starting with many, many rules, but they distilled it into these 4 critical rules. Number 1, ask as many questions as you can. 2, do not stop to answer, judge, or discuss the questions. 3, write down every question exactly as it is stated. And 4, change any statements into questions. So I'm going to ask Tammy to throw up this poll, and I'm going to take a moment to see which of those rules do you think it will be most difficult to follow as we begin our question formulation technique. And this is a list of rules that you would present your learners with before you start in on the QFT, and it's a great opportunity to really discuss this protocol and why it's important for learners to go through these rules as they're producing their questions, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So submit your answer. Which rule for producing questions do you think will be most difficult to follow? And we'll close this in just a couple of seconds.
And just to
I'm
throw
really
in here,
interested in
and just to throw in here, John, that I have often posted the rules for producing questions just in the classroom or the library, where they stay up all the time.
Thank you, Connie, and we'll learn more about that and how you do that when you share some examples. So the next slide you're going to see is what we call the Q focus, or the question focus. And this is meant to be the catalyst for the students' questions. And so it's not a question, and that's very important to reiterate. It's not a question from the teacher or the students, but rather it's a teacher-designed, selected focus for your students to start asking questions. And in just a moment, I'm going to show you that Q focus, but let's see the results of this poll. Which rule for producing questions do you think will be most difficult to follow? Let's see if we have those results. I'll wait for those to come in, but in the meantime, I'm going to take us to the Q focus, as I mentioned. And this is your Q focus. So get out your pencil or pen and paper.
Hey, John?
Yes.
Sorry, I have the results, but for some reason they're not letting me share this one. Most folks said that the rule that would be the most difficult is do not stop to answer, judge, or discuss, with 44% choosing that one.
Thank you for
You're welcome.
your
Sorry.
That is often what we find to be one of the most difficult rules for students to follow as well. And this is an important rule because we just want you to get your questions out there without any intervening or of other commentary or judging or discussions. So now is the Q focus. In the digital age, some students are not asking questions. Take a moment just to write as many questions as you can based on this Q focus. We'll take just about 10-15 seconds. Jot down as many questions as you can. Remember to follow those rules. Don't stop to judge yourself as you write these questions. Get down as many questions as you can. In the digital age, some students are not asking questions. That's our Q focus. I hate to stop you there, but I hope you were able to jot down some questions or even devise some questions in your head. I'm going to take us through the next step and the rest of the process. Once again, this is a very abbreviated experience of going through the QFT, but I'm going to talk now about that next step, and I'm going to hand it over to Connie to really discuss the closed and open-ended questions. And first, we're going to just think through the closed-ended questions and open-ended questions because we're going to start categorizing those questions that you created. Closed-ended questions, we say, can be answered with a yes or no or a one-word answer, and open-ended questions require more explanation. Now, on your list of questions, quickly identify which ones are closed by writing a C next to those questions, and which ones are open by writing an O next to those questions. Just take a few seconds to do this, to categorize your questions as closed or open.
And feel free to write them in the chat, or the Q&A, I'm sorry.
And Connie, I'll hand it over to you to break down a bit more the discussion around closed-ended and open-ended questions.
Okay, then it comes down to asking you a question in terms of what do you think the advantages might be of a closed-ended question? You write them in there, write some of those.
Go ahead and write some advantages of what you feel.
Okay, so Mary says 2 or 3 are closed. What do you think an advantage might be to asking a closed-ended question? What are some quick check for understanding? Certainly easier to answer. Yes, I've often said that if Siri can answer it, it's probably a closed-ended question. What about a disadvantage to closed-ended question? More positive questions has an answer. Informal assessment, right? No thinking involved, that can be possible. No room for discussion is certainly one of the bigger ones. Makes student think that there's a right or wrong answer. So advantages and disadvantages to closed questions. Then that takes us into open-ended questions. I'm going to ask you the same thing. What might be the advantage of an open-ended question? And I'm really loving your answers here on different things. But yes, open-ended questions can begin to lead a discussion. It might develop a deeper understanding because of that discussion, multiple sources, provoking more thoughts. Now, throw in some disadvantages to open-ended questions. Encourages creativity. And the silence, the disadvantage, those open-ended questions when you've asked them and nobody answers. It can be frustrating that you don't have a quick answer to throw in there. And yes, it is very easy to veer off topic with open-ended questions. Okay, the other.
Thank you, Connie.
Yeah.
Really great insight there from our participants, and very similar discussions that we see when we facilitate this with other educators and with our students as well. And so now your next task is to begin improving your questions. So we're going to ask you to take one closed-ended question from your list and change it into an open-ended question. And then you're going to do that for your open-ended question. You're going to take one open-ended question and turn it into a closed-ended question. So take a moment to go into your questions and just to choose one closed-ended, change it to open-ended. It could be just with one word that you could use to change it, and then take an open-ended question and change it to a closed-ended question. I see. To what extent is the rise of social media a factor? Interesting. How have the state standards testing impacted this trend? Really interesting questions.
And flipping that around, to what extent is the rise of social media a factor? Is social media a factor?
Right. Thank you, Connie.
Yeah, it's that going back and forth between the two really helps us and helps our students to identify research questions that they might be able to answer.
So some great questions coming out of the Q focus. And the next stage of our process would be where students would strategize how they will be using their questions moving forward. students have produced the questions, they've done some work on open and close, they've changed them, they've identified them, and now we want students to be prioritizing those questions. So choose just one question you consider most important from your list and think which question would be most critical to respond to that cue focus. In the digital age, some students are not asking questions. And we'd love to see these questions. Choose one priority question in your list and throw it in the Q&A box there. And we're just going to read some of these off. What types of questions are students asking from their devices? Are students feeling overwhelmed by the amount of information? Are there statistics comparing students asking questions before and since the digital age? Ooh, very interesting. What type of devices do students use? Are students thinking or just following directions? Very interesting question. To what extent is internet involved in this? So all really exciting questions to see in your prioritization process here. So something we would ask the learners or the students to do as they're prioritizing is think about why they chose that question. And then also it's really interesting for the students to think about where their priority question falls in their sequence of the entire list of questions. Was it a question that came out at the very beginning of their formulation, or was it later in their list? So you want them to choose at least 3 that they will help them possibly with their research. That might be a reason that you're having them prioritize. You could be choosing one question that they want to investigate in terms of making a decision. And Connie will really go through the different ways that she has used the QFT and then use those priority questions to go into the next stages of her lesson or the implementation of the curriculum. So we're going to see some of these examples play out from Connie. So another part of the process that we're not going to get to as deeply in this session is the reflection part. And this is so critical, especially in the first times you lead the QFT with your learners. But we really want your learners to think about what they learned during the process and how they learned it. What they understood more deeply about the cue focus. And of course, that cue focus is chosen by you as the teacher, as the facilitator of the QFT. And that QFT and the cue focus that you choose, you want to do some back planning. You want to think where you're getting to with those priority questions, where you want your learners to get to in the stage of actually prioritizing and then the next steps of using their questions. So I'd love for you to insert some comments and reflection from what you just learned from this process. What did you learn in terms of having to generate questions in a very kind of sophisticated set structure as the QFT? What did you learn more about the questions that you developed in relation to the cue focus in terms of some students not asking questions in the digital age? We'd love to see some of your comments. It takes time to come up with meaningful questions. Excellent. It does take time. And once again, we did not give you that full time that you'd want to devote to the QFT with your own learners. So I'm glad that is something that you noticed even during this experience. It takes a lot of thought and interest in the topic, exactly. And that's why it's so critical as the teacher and facilitator of the QFT to choose that cue focus very wisely. And we have some great materials on our website at writequestion.org that will really lead you through that process of choosing the cue focus and thinking deeply about how you want to use the cue focus as part of the QFT. So for the sake of time, I just wanted to mention that, although the QFT, the question formulation technique, took years for Dan and Luz to really perfect, we kind of joke that it can be represented on this one slide. it really is all about maintaining that structure and that structure becoming really second nature as you, the facilitator or the teacher, lead your students through the cue focus and the question formulation technique. But what are some of the specific aspects of the process in terms of the thinking abilities that are taking place as learners go through the QFT? So let's unpack this a little bit. There are actually 3 thinking abilities that are embedded into this one process. And this is part of that rigor that is in the question formulation technique. Students are practicing rigorous thinking and rigorous work as they go through each of those steps that you just went through. They begin to think in many directions by getting all those questions on their paper. And students would be working in groups, collaborating together to formulate their questions and really practice the skill of divergent thinking. So students take those 4 rules and they're trying to create that space and the structure for them to get as many questions out as they can. And then, as they do more thinking, after they have their questions all formulated, they begin to narrow down and focus. That convergent thinking skill is practiced. As they begin to look at their open and closed-ended questions just as you did. They begin to categorize those questions. They prioritize those questions. And when they're prioritizing their questions, they are continuing with the kind of sophisticated convergent thinking that should come after that divergent thinking process of getting all the questions out there. So you'll notice there's a sequence here. And then last but not least, students are practicing that metacognitive thinking. There are several steps in that process that students are thinking about their own thinking, beginning with when they're asked what might be different about following the 4 rules for producing questions. They have to think about how they usually operate and kind of what's different about it. What's different about these rules that are requiring them to think in many different ways. And they have to think about the advantages and the disadvantages of the open and closed questions. And so they're really going through these 3 thinking abilities in this very simple process of the question formulation technique. And so if we think a bit more about that metacognitive piece, research confirms that importance of student questioning and its relationship to metacognitive thinking, as evidenced right here by John Hattie's work in his book, Visible Learning. So most importantly, though, we like to reflect on what students are saying about the question formulation technique and how it's impacted their learning. So we love these quotes from one of our 6th graders and a high school student. Just when you think you know all you need to know, you ask another question and discover how much more there is to learn. And then our high school student, asking questions is important because it opens up discussions and debates about issues. And I think you noticed that in the short amount of time that we just experienced the QFT, but now I'm going to hand it over to Connie so she can really discuss how this looks in practice and the different ways she's used the technique with her students.
Thank you very much, John. I'm really enjoying the comments on the side here. You can go to the next slide. We're going to talk briefly. We're going to talk pretty much from here on out about inquiry and research and how the QFT fits in and how we can add it into our lives. Whenever we have an information need, whether it's personal, social, or academic, we use the same process, the research process. Like the QFT, we learn the formal process first, but soon we know the steps so well that we don't have to spend time on each step. We just do it. And that's why I think the QFT is such a fabulous strategy. It's one we can use every day in a multitude of situations. Next slide. John mentioned briefly about standards, and standards are certainly important to us all, but standards and frameworks, all of them have come out. They all say the same thing. They all address the need for an inquiry-based curriculum that centers on student questioning. But what is even more important to all the standards is the next phase of it, which is some sort of a call to action, whether in social study it's a civic action or activity or participation, or whether it's scientific investigation. publications and endeavors. The American Association of School Librarians just released their new school library standard, which absolutely dovetails with all of these other standards in terms of inquiry and investigation. Jamie Casap, a Google educator, spoke as a keynote at a conference the other day, and he said it's time to tweak the question we always ask of kids: what do you want to be when you grow up? And change that to, what problem do you want to solve? All our standards are guiding us now to make that move from being to doing, and that includes active participation in all levels throughout all our lives. Next slide. So how do I incorporate this into my classroom without impacting my curriculum? There's a million ways. Next slide. Okay, so research is a process. Research comes out of an information need, and we research to a question, not a statement. That research need can be your assignment, but it can be, I need to know more information about something I'm interested in. As students progress, they tweak the questions that they ask, whether that's at the beginning of a lesson, but as they dig deeper and deeper into any research they do, they're most likely going to want to switch their questions to directly converse with their sources, asking those sources if they're valid, useful, or reliable. Then they may turn again later to their own claims, and their job is to make sure that they've been able to back up those claims with evidence. The easiest way to do that is to ask themselves questions related to those claims and to make sure that they answer them with an appropriate evidence. Okay, next slide. So hand in hand with research is inquiry. Inquiry, like research, is also a process. Persistence, making their way through that process, will come with help from us. We can help students create the questions that they want to answer. Again, keeping in mind that research is a process that we use in just about everything we do, from going to the movies to designing a functioning robot to help surgeons conduct surgery. More precisely, our goal is to incorporate the questioning habit into their lives so that when they face decision-making problems as adults, decisions such as, am I going to vaccinate my children? I need to buy my first house, and who am I going to vote for in the next election? They'll know how to ask the right questions and then identify answers that provide valid evidence to support those decisions. Next question. Sorry, I was ahead of myself. The Circle of Viewpoints is a thinking process framed within Harvard's Visible Thinking Project. Again, looking at the role of questions in our lives, approaching any document, topic, person, or idea from either a singular point of view, such as, if I had a document in the middle of this infographic here, and that document was a poster, or a voting poster for the role of genetically modified seed in our town, and I were an environmentalist, how would I feel about it? How about a farmer? Having students generate those questions gets them started thinking about how different groups of people react to situations and images and claims from a particular point of view. You can see how practicing question building can begin a thinking process that moves from just my viewpoint to a larger questioning frame. Again, our goal is to create learners who understand there are many ways to think about events, and learning to question from multiple points of view lets them understand those events better and then how to apply them to things going on around us today. Next slide. So I did notice people were asking, when do I do this? Well, let's start at the beginning of a unit. You can use the QFT to get kids thinking about what you're going to start studying. So this is an example of some questions to a Q focus of genetic engineering strives for perfection. It was a 10th grade English class. They were heading to read Frankenstein, and then eventually they were to pick a topic on the theme related to different themes found in the book. What was interesting was that this Q focus got students asking the questions and discussing the importance of perfection. Certainly, Frankenstein was not the perfect example of a perfect model of a perfect human, but it got them questioning about why do we need to be perfect? How can we become perfect? And then even into questions such as designing babies. The power questioning brought the book alive, far more interesting for students, and made many more connections than when we had done the same project in the past. Next slide. What if, during our usual unit, perhaps on the amendments or a certain time frame, and then perhaps we want to hone in on women's suffrage, what if we added one little step and added, say, a timeline that surrounds the classroom, or a question board where students can write questions throughout the unit, or a discussion board where students add in questions to be discussed later. So start with the Declaration of Sentiments, excuse me. Start with the Seneca Falls Women's Conference Declaration of Sentiments as a cue focus to get them started talking about women's suffrage. Then, as you give activities throughout the unit, lecture, some probably textbook work, maybe beginning to do their essays, everyone can add items to the timeline. So as students do stop, you can throw out a cue focus, such as the one listed above, which is, hey students, look at, in event A and event G seem to be related. Let's QFT that. And so you can then use that as a formative assessment. You can play with it a lot. You can also use it as discussion points on topics of interest within that time frame that you want to make sure that they cover. Next slide. And speaking of assessment, both Jamie McKenzie, the creator of the questioning toolkit on his website, fno.org, or from now on.org, and Sam Weinberg of the Stanford History Education Group talk about using questions as assessment tools. DBQs, or document-based questions, like those that are used for AP History, are examples of giving students a document or a primary source image and asking questions of it. Assessment can consist not only of the quality of the questions, but the answers that they get to those questions. So let students write their own tests and either give those tests using the best of those questions, or hey, let their questions and the answers to them be their final exam. Or they can ask questions and swap them and answer their fellow students' questions. You can use an in-class essay by giving students a compelling task. For example, why do we care about the War of 1812? Or in Q focus form, the War of 1812 was an important war. Include the questioning process and their pros, and because they're pros by now, as a step in your assessment. I've used the traditional assessment with my information literacy class students, where I just directly ask them, here is a bit of text, and this one about drive-in theaters, and their task was to pick a possible research topic that they could use based on this text, and the quality of their answers was what was tested. Another task was to have them write 3 closed-ended questions and then turn them into open questions. Again, just as an assessment. Next slide, please. Use the QFT before an event or speakers, before you go take them to a play, going on field trips. We had a guest speaker, a Holocaust survivor speaker, and our Q focus was the Holocaust is still with us. You can use the QFT to jumpstart the questions that they might ask the speaker. After we did this for our Holocaust speakers, students listened to her speak and then could, if they wanted, use any questions they wanted to ask when it was time for question time. They actually jumped right in with questions that we considered to be deeper than classes that had never gone through this process had. So, by the way, it was done within a 20-minute time period just before she came. So the number of questions that were generated, well over 21 out of many students, just in that short time frame, was quite compelling. Next slide. We can go to the next slide after that. A couple of examples are, again, in my information literacy class, I usually ask students to evaluate their sources by giving them a set of criteria. It's called the CRAFT test. It's based on the acronym about looking for currency, reliability, authority. They dutifully fill it out, but they never were able to transfer it to anything else. So I used the Q focus. I want to go to Iceland. And from that Q focus, they wrote their own questions, prioritized them into the most important, and what they ended up coming up with was exactly the criteria that I would have given them. They were far more invested in this process and in the project that they ultimately would have written, and they now have the questions that they created to ask the sources for their validity. Next one. Again, high school English, 9th grade students had no context for the time period for the book they were going to be reading, called To Kill a Mockingbird. Here's where the QFT at the beginning of a unit works really well with an image. Students were divided. I had the images laying out. They chose an image that's up to them. They met in groups with similar images, and I did the Q. The image was the Q focus. As students dig deeper into the book that they were reading, they had questions about the time period that they were able then to use. One of the classes created a timeline that they put on the wall where they could put in questions and added events, not only from the book, but from the time period, where they could then stop and have discussions on them throughout the unit. Next slide. My last example is from a high school health class where using the actual words of the law regarding sexting is the Q focus given to this health class. Used at the beginning of a unit as a way to talk about a potentially embarrassing topic or one that uses ideas and words that can be uncomfortable. The QFT is an excellent tool to guide discussion. It's hard. Question building, especially in groups with lots of sharing out with ownership of the questions, go out to the whole group so it can be discussed. Let me tell you that talking about sexting and sexually suggestive texting and images can be quite interesting with high school kids. The QFT rule, the hard one for us all about don't judge, discuss, or answer any questions during the question building stage, is perfect for sensitive subjects. These students were tasked to create a poster, so their ultimate QFT question became the question that they wanted to ask to make a poster for their readers that went into a health clinic. Next slide. This is just a quick slide to remind your students that if they're getting stuck in the research, go back to their question. If we do it enough times, the questioning will become second nature. QFT, in my experience, is the classroom instructional moment that allows students to practice asking questions, get feedback on them, identify their use, and then go search for answers so that when they graduate from high school and college or go to work directly out of high school, questioning is indeed second nature to them. Of course, they question their politicians, their doctors, their realtors, or even their best friends when they don't understand or agree with something. And then last, the easiest thing we can do in our physical environment is to create a questioning environment. Give them reminders without even talking. This is where you want to make it so your room is where they can ask the questions. Give it a boost by posting some question starters. Pretty soon you'll be talking with them about something and can just throw out a, hey, let's answer that close-ended question right now. Take 5 minutes, locate an answer, and move on. But what most likely will happen, which is the most satisfying, is when you're talking to kids and there's a discussion and somebody asks the question, somebody will nearly always jump in and go, hey, Ms. Williams, did you notice that really cool open-ended question I just asked? You'll see that your students are thinking more creatively after a while and are more willing to apply those questions in places you never thought they would. So next slide, we bring it over to John with.
Thank you, Connie, for some great examples. Connie will stay on for questions from you all, which we'll get to in a moment. So start putting those questions in the Q&A box. But I just wanted to end with a couple more thoughts. In terms of the skill of asking questions, these are just a handful of the outcomes we see as they relate to teaching and learning. For moving from ignorance as weakness to ignorance as opportunity, and everything from just demonstrating inquiry in the classroom to bringing a little more joy into your practice, which we know is very demanding. And above all, it's about democracy. And so the woman seated in the center of the picture at the table is named Septima Clark. She's one of the great educators of the 20th century, but relatively unknown during that time. And in 1955, she was fired by the Charleston, South Carolina Board of Education after 18 years of teaching because she was a member of the NAACP. So she and her cousin, Bernice Robinson, who's standing right there behind her, they organized citizenship schools to teach adults in the community basic literacy skills so they could learn to help themselves, not get cheated out of wages, and begin to prepare for a larger agenda of participating in democracy. And that's really the opportunity that we all have when we're sharing and teaching that skill of question formulation. The opportunity to build civic capacity through a foundational democratic skill, really. It's impossible to imagine a dictatorship without questions, without citizens being able to ask questions. But it's not possible to imagine a democracy without questions. Keep in mind Septima Clark's words. We need to be taught to study rather than to believe, to inquire and rather than to affirm. Really important words there. And so we thank all of you for the amazing work you do to motivate your learners to become curious and think more deeply. And we are delighted to share this technique, the question formulation technique, with you all today. And I just want you to submit your questions, and also I leave you with that final slide there to access our materials. And we did have a question about the slides for this webinar. We will put those slides on that seminar page, which is right under our website address, rightquestion.org. And we do have time for some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, both John and Connie. Again, I apologize for the hiccups at the very beginning with the audio, but I did want to share some feedback that I saw along the way. Jane said that changing open to closed and closed to open questions was a very interesting exercise. And shout out to Eric, who said, hey, Connie, I'm listening with my entire grade 12 English class in Canada. They love to question. So I wanted to share those with you.
Yay!
So one of the questions is, how do you address teachers that say they don't have time to do this because it takes too long?
Great question. I'll hand that over to Connie.
Yes. It's funny. I had a slide that I thought was in there, but I guess I took it out. The way to do it, to start with, because it really, the first time you use it is the time it takes time. It's like anything. You're introducing a new process to students. After that, you don't have to do it the same way or the same length of time, nor do the whole entire process. So my suggestion is to pick a unit that you really like to do and find one element from that unit or one task that goes with that, and then give it a try. Instead of introducing it the way you might normally do it, look at what theme or what idea or what excitement you want to generate from them, and pick a key focus that goes with it. And the RQI Right Question site has some materials that you can use to help you with this. But once you get a key focus, then just give it a shot. I can't tell you how many times I had I won't call them magnificent failures, but it didn't go the way I wanted to, but the reflection piece is really, really important. And I went back and did it and kept trying with it. And even, I say magnificent failure, but I got more questions out of that magnificent failure than I ever had before. Go small and just give it a shot. And then pretty soon you will be using it just on your own because it's so compelling. It's more fun, too.
It is. Thank you so much. Another question that we received, what does the strategy look like at the kindergarten or first grade level? What do you suggest with the youngest of students? Do visuals work best? These were sort of a combination of questions.
Yes, so I can jump in there just because we have
Yes.
a lot of examples on our site and when we do presentations out there with educators. Images work fantastically with the young learners, and we would suggest too to work through the QFT as a group, possibly a whole group during rug time. Allow the learners to see the questions go up as you're working through the process. And I think, you know, retaining that process is still really important, and even helping the learners identify the open and closed. This is work that they can definitely do. And so just for an example, one educator used an image of alligators as they were studying a nonfiction text around ecosystems and the animals that live in those ecosystems. So the learners went through the QFT as they responded to the Q focus of this image. And the questions are just really interesting to see, and making the questions visual for all learners is so important that they can see each other's thinking. And Connie, I don't know if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, I do. For the little guys, I've done it with third and fourth graders, and usually I do it with a visual because it's really the most compelling and easy thing to do with them. That is your cue focus. But I also want to include in here that prioritization, that when you ask students to prioritize their question, I've found that the prioritization, what you ask them to prioritize depends on what you want them to do. So if they're looking for topics for a research paper, the questions that you're going to ask to rise to the top or to prioritize might be different than if you are asking them to think deeply about a Socratic topic that you are going to discuss in just a few moments, or such as the one for criteria building. So the prioritization depends a lot on what your task is and why you're doing the process in the first place. That was my sense.
Great.
Oh, and I do need to throw out here, because I did see about using it in a self-contained special education class. I have used it with special ed class students, and it works very well with them.
And just also, I wanted to add that because I saw some questions about with adult learners and outside of the field of education, and certainly this is a technique that has been used in many different fields, and adult learners and through professional development with educators is something that we highly suggest using this technique. It works really well with all age groups.
Great. Thank you. So I have another question. Let's see. I will take with this last question, and then I've curated as many as I can. I've had a little bit of a hard time because I was trying to distinguish between the open-ended questions and the actual questions for you guys. So one is asking about how this compares with Grant Wiggins' essential questions, which I think is backwards design, understanding by design.
Right. Do you want to jump in, John?
Oh, well, I was just going to mention in terms of that, we know that there are many different tools out there for formulating questions and getting learners to get to those essential questions or driving questions. This is one tool that has been perfected over many years through the Right Questions Institute. But, you know, this is a very kind of structured way of getting to those questions and prioritizing questions, and there's reason to that structure and reason to that rigor based on all the research that Dan and Luz have conducted over the years. And Connie, I'll hand it over to you as well.
Well, again, from a teacher practical point of view, there are some times when I want to give the essential question because I have something I want them to know. But for the most part, the QFT works in such a way that the the important essential questions. And in this way, I think of essential to the student is the value and the richness of the QFT, is that my essential question may not be what is going to provide the persistence and the interest and the follow-through from students, but every time I use QFT, students have found their own essential questions. And just, you know, when you start out with whatever task you're giving students and you have them make those questions up, then their ownership of them, if it's not the quote unquote right question, it will become apparent because they will get stuck. They won't be able to continue in the deeper realms that you're asking them for the task that is needed. So that's my sense to it, is it puts the essentialness back to the students who are going to be doing work.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that we could go on and on, but we are past 4 o'clock, so I'm going to keep all of these questions here, and we will find a way to get the answers to you. Maybe we'll do a blog post and have the answers shared that way through like a Q&A format, or we can respond directly. I'll work that out with John and Connie. Again, when the session is over, you'll be redirected to a landing page where you can request more information or free trial of Points of View Reference Center, which is an EBSCO database that can support information literacy instruction at the high school and college levels. EBSCO also has many resources that can support IL instruction at the middle and elementary school levels as well. So please feel free to use that form that comes up on the landing page to request a consult with your SAIL. So thank you all very much. Thank you to John and Connie. You guys were fantastic, and we really appreciate your time. And I hope everyone has a great day, and good luck with your endeavors using the QFT.